Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted. This is your trigger warning. This podcast contains unfiltered conversations about trauma, abuse, and survival. Discretion is advised. This is not therapy or medical advice, just real people sharing real stories. So please take care of yourself and pause if you need to. If this conversation hits home, grab the book Survival Mode Exit Plan, your raw, unapologetic blueprint to break free. Available now by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the comments. Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. It's Letitia, your host, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and I am with Rachel today. So, Rachel, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Rachel Lemon, and my brand is Lemonade. So from my name, and because my career has been in healthcare, so my career was in pharmacy for 30 years, and in healthcare, working in hospitals, and also sort of at a national level. So from the reason why I'm here today with you is because I'm a survivor, or thriver, as I like to call it, of domestic abuse, and also parental abuse when I looked back at my journey, like having a parent who made me think that abusive behavior was perhaps the normal. I've done a lot of work subsequently, as a lot of people do, on myself, on healing, my healing journey, and looking at, I think more importantly for me, rather than focusing on the person, the perpetrator, was around looking at why I thought those kind of behaviors, why they didn't set off alarm bells. So because you can't change other people, you can't change what's happened in the past, and you can only choose what you do moving forward. So I think from my point of view, I'm very self-aware and sort of introspective. So I think naturally at first we're like, why me? What did I do to, but it's not, it's about the learned behaviors that we've had growing up. And so for me, I did a lot of work around noticing like what triggers are obviously looking at my boundaries, because clearly I needed to do a lot of work on that, and also how it affects you in your work life as well, because obviously if we're in that situation and we don't have boundaries, or our confidence is not, it does affect us in other areas of our life. So for me, I did the healing work was around my mindset, rebuilding my confidence, and I guess trust. It was more about trusting my intuition again, because I'm very intuitive, but afterwards I was kind of questioning, like, why didn't I see that? I should have noticed that. I can see it when it's happening with other people, but for me as an intuitive person, how did I miss all these signs? So it was kind of learning to trust my intuition again. Took a good year probably of like knowing something was true, but never like quite, and I don't mean relationship wise, I mean just in general, like whatever I thought, was learning to follow my gut again. So yeah, that was like a period of healing, and did some group therapy. I suppose call it therapy, but like pattern changing course with a group of women, which again, when you're in a long-term abusive relationship, you're isolated and you don't have friends, and the friends that you do have at work don't really understand. They're very much, aren't they, well, it can't have been that bad, or you would have just left, or they don't really understand unless you've been through it. You don't understand. So for me, meeting other women that had similar experiences, obviously it was sad to know that so many other people go through the same thing, but it was also great to meet people that understood each other without necessarily having to talk about it all the time. We just had that kind of knowing that, and be able to work through things together. So like the first date you go on after you've been in a relationship for a long time with an abuser, you know, dating again, or even making friends in your 40s, it's like a whole new thing, isn't it? Like, you know, when you're a kid and you're at school or college, you're just like, oh, that person looks cool, they can be my new friend. But it doesn't quite work like that in adulthood, does it? You can't just like go up to a random person and say, oh, look, you look like my kind of perfect friend. So yeah, learning to kind of navigate all of that, and then all of the other things coming out the other side of getting your own home again, and dealing with any sort of leftover debts and things that most of us come out of those kind of relationships with. So yeah, just doing a lot of healing work really, and also acknowledging, I think a big thing for me was acknowledging that looking for answers was never going to be conducive and a good use of my energy, because you can wonder why someone's done something, but you're never going to find out really. So instead of that, using that energy to like focus on looking forward and building, you know, a life that I deserve and that I want. So you've gone quiet.
Sorry about that. My daughter was
That's
in here and
okay.
she's quite noisy. So you spoke about a lot, and the things that I kind of want to focus on is around the recognition of the red flags. I suspect that a lot of people that are listening really don't understand the cycle of abuse, and they don't understand how we get sucked in for an extended period of time, knowing that we are being abused, right? So, can you speak to a bit of like some of the red flags that might be ignored early in relationships to maybe help someone recognize whether or not they could be in an abusive relationship?
Yeah, so I think for me and for lots of other people that I've worked with subsequently is that little things that at the time you think are signs of affection, that somebody really loves you. So even subtle things like, I like your hair in a certain way, you look better without makeup, or I prefer you wearing trousers, or I don't like you wearing high heels. But they don't say to you, I don't want you to wear high heels, I don't want you to wear that red lipstick. It's more like, oh, you look prettier without it. You look prettier without makeup. You know, your hair looks better when it's a certain way. And so it's kind of, it's served up to you as a compliment. And so when you've just met someone who you think is the love of your life, all of those kind of things, unless you've learned about red flags and gaslighting and love bombing and things like that, you don't realize almost until it's too late, because those things just creep up insidiously, don't they? And things like isolating you from your friend groups, you know, like when you meet your new partner, which most of us do, and then first when you meet someone, you're all loved up and you want to be with them all the time, but you don't realize it's like when they don't want to integrate with your friends and they start to like distance you from your friends and family. And it could be subtle things like just saying things like, oh, they said something horrible about you, and then just put that doubt in your mind, you know, like, oh, they're not really your friend, or they take advantage of you. So for example, I had a close friend who had 4 children, and I used to babysit for them a lot when I was single. And then obviously when I met my partner, he would be like, oh, she's only using you to babysit for the children if you weren't looking after them. So kind of like driving that wedge between the people that you're close to. And at the time it kind of, you're, you know, you're in the throes of this new relationship and you're kind of seeing the best in somebody, and I think people don't show you who they are. I think I can't remember if I read it or heard it somewhere, but doesn't it take somebody a good 3 months? They can keep up pretending to be lovely for 3 months, and then after that's when you start to see the first kind of signs of cracks or, you know, red flag behavior. But for the first 3 months, people are very good at putting on a really good show. And often by the time we've been with them for a few months, depending on what circumstances we're in, but if you're living with someone or something, well, look, you end up kind of making excuses or ignoring those little things because
Yeah.
you don't realize that they're the start of something big.
No, exactly. And it's very interesting. It's like for my case, I know you spoke about, some childhood abuse. I didn't necessarily have childhood abuse, but I had a lot of abandonment. And for me, like my first, I would say 3 or 4 long-term relationships were abusive. My very first one was abusive, which I entered into when I was 14. And then coming out of that relationship and going into another relationship, because that is what I knew, although I had an awareness of the physical abuse, I had no idea about the emotional, the psychological abuse that happens. So as a result, I got very used to a certain type of courting, right? Happened very fast, like very, very fast. And the love bombing and like the extremes. I That's what I knew in that courting process. So I remember entering into something that was very healthy and it was like very slow. It was a slow burn. And I was like, what is this?
Yeah, you're more suspicious of the nice person because you're like, this
Exactly.
is too good to be true. Like, there's something wrong with them.
Absolutely. But if you know no different, and of course, because I didn't have the awareness of the emotional abuse that I had been through until many, many years later, I found myself often disinterested because it wasn't like the other fast moving relationships. And oftentimes, listeners, when you are entering into unhealthy, toxic situations, they happen very quickly. They like, it's like overnight things snowball because generally they work to like kind of get you sucked in, right? And like you said, it takes several months, and oftentimes they know that they can't keep up the facade for so long, so they get you entwined quite quickly.
Yeah, and it does happen quick. It does happen quickly, like you said, the kind of love bombing thing, which I never knew was a thing. So, I my parents was more emotionally and psychologically abusive and controlling, and me and my brother. I think it's not really, again, not really till I've got a lot older and done my own coaching qualifications and my trauma qualifications where I've realized actually, a lot of the things that we grew up with weren't normal parenting. Like, even as an adult, we still was just like, surely, like everyone's got one lovely parent if they're lucky. Everyone's got one that's a bit mean or tough on them, or so it, and how it affects you with your siblings as well, because like, like the, what do they call it, like the black sheep and also like the favorite child. So that kind of is always like pitting the children up against each other, and that causes dynamics within the family as well. So if you are, like I would say, as the black sheep, is then, like you said, you're seeking that love and reassurance somewhere else, aren't you? So when somebody does come in and they're all lovely and it feels like they're protecting you when actually they're not, they're controlling you, that's probably why we fall for it so quickly. It's because it, as a, doesn't really matter how old we are, but if someone suddenly starts to look out for you and you're not used to that, it feels like it's a good thing.
I had always labeled like my first relationship as like my Prince Charming because of the circumstances that I had been in. It felt like he was saving me, but I had no idea that I was being groomed because I was so young. And oftentimes, like you said, if we're seeking validation, if we're looking, we all we want to be is just loved, we will gravitate to that type of behavior. And oftentimes people can pick up on our neediness, our desperateness in a sense. Another thing that you spoke about, which I think is really important to expand on, is that level of once you go through the healing process, especially after extended periods of abuse, it's that point of trusting yourself again. And I remember having this reconciliation of, you know what, like, I ended up being arrested on my job, and there was this reconciliation of, okay, I may not be the reason why I'm here directly, but it's my decisions. I've made a series of really bad decisions, which then resulted in me being in circumstances which would have resulted in me being arrested. And then once you recognize that, it's really is a struggle to start trusting yourself again because you then feel like, wow, I'm not dumb. I kind of know I know how to handle myself. So how could I have made such massively bad decisions? And then you start questioning the smallest things. You start second guessing the smallest little decisions. And oftentimes, we start looking for validation again, like, am I making the right decision? Going to people who we may trust more than ourselves.
I think it's really important. An important part of healing for me, I think, it was the taking time to like not be in a relationship, was to learn to trust my intuition. Like it was usually I was right, but it, like you said, it was just that little, even that 1%, if you didn't trust yourself, and like not having to seek validation from friends or anyone, like even if it was like, do I want to wear this outfit? You know, silly little things that people take for granted that get eroded when you're in a controlling relationship. So like, what music do I like? What films do I want to watch? If I'm sat on my own and I get to choose, like I've been with someone for so long who controlled everything, you know, like leaving the dishes overnight rather than washing them straight away, or just silly things that we take for granted that by the time you come out of a long-term abusive relationship, you've kind of lost all of those little bits of you because you're just existing and surviving. So you don't think about things like that, do you? And even like subconsciously, like if they only listen to a certain type of music, even though they might not be in the car with you, you'd still put on their music rather than think, what do I like? Because it's just almost like subconsciously programmed into you. And it's
Yes.
almost like they you feel like they know everything you're doing by that point. So whether they were there or not, you still feel like that they'll know. And it doesn't sound rational to people who haven't experienced that level of coercive control. And like you said, we're not dumb. And quite often, I think that's a misconception as well, isn't it? That like people that are less intelligent will get abused and people who are smart don't get abused, when actually it's quite common that guys who repeatedly, or women, but people who perpetrate repeatedly will always look for somebody who's stronger because it's almost like more of a game for them to break them down. And so the myth of like you being a bit stupid, a bit naive, a bit thick, it's kind of, no, you're not. And actually, like you said, are you, the vulnerability is coming from that place of just being human, I guess, and wanting someone to love you for who you are, which is probably what everybody wants, isn't it, deep down?
Yeah, it's one of our core needs, you know what I mean? That
Yeah.
sense of belonging, that sense of love, that sense of acceptance. And oftentimes, because I mean, a lot of us have been through a lot in childhood, and I think that plays a significant role in the people that we attach to, the things that we are attracted to, while we have a conscious understanding of the difference, we often can't see it. We're kind of like blinded by it.
Yeah, because when you
Because
look back, you'll
Mhm.
see, you see the patterns from childhood, like what friendship groups were you in? Like, were you in, I was friends with the people who, lot of people who are older than me. But so maybe, like you said, maybe you did things and got into trouble because you were with a group of people that were really a more, more grown up stage than you were
Mhm.
as a young teenager, for example, but also like being bullied at school and things like that, that also affects your self-confidence, doesn't it? So then when you get to the point of having relationships, again, all of those kind of things, so whether you've got a parent who's always reinforcing that you're not quite good enough,
Mhm.
that kind of, like you said, it does affect the friendships and relationships you accept, because I wouldn't accept those kind of friendships now where somebody made me feel bad about myself. Whereas when I was younger, maybe if I was in a group of friends where they're always like slagging off one person or something, I probably would have stayed in that group, because it would be like, that's my friends. Again, that's how people behave. But now I know that's not how the people that I want to be around behave. But
Absolutely.
we don't learn that, and at school as well. I mean, obviously I'm older, but when I was at school, like junior school and stuff, it was, bullying wasn't really ever dealt with. It was just accepted. It was like, it's like a rite of passage. And
Mhm.
even within like, within my in my professional life as well, it was all almost like, it's normal for managers to pick on new people, so that whole kind of culture, it's bigger than just our romantic relationships, isn't it? It's the fact that society tells us that we should put up with those kind of things and those behaviors, and that having boundaries makes us unpopular. And
It's I think that's actually really an important point, right? We are almost conditioned not to have boundaries. We are conditioned to keep people around us comfortable. And that, particularly when you're being abused, that level of conditioning really is what keeps you stuck, because you've been conditioned to be, I want to be careful how I phrase this, because I don't want it to seem as if um I don't want it to be misperceived, but we are conditioned to be considerate of everybody else but ourselves.
yeah, 100%. And I think more so as women, which is probably why like 95% of a domestic abuse cases are women,
Hmm.
because we're brought up, aren't we? Like my nan, both my nans, they would be like, girls should be seen and not heard, like don't rock the boat, so that one nan was the opposite. But when I was growing up, it was like, you need to do things properly and don't disrupt this, and don't speak back to your teachers, even if they're being horrible to you or hitting you with a ruler, you just got to stand there and take it. It was, yeah, don't rock the boat, wasn't it? And when you
Hmm.
get your first job, you can't, it doesn't matter what your boss says to you, they're right. And then
Hmm.
we're taught the customer's always right, aren't we?
Hmm.
Even in
Everybody's always
work,
right
yeah.
besides us.
Yeah, so we're just brought up with that. Yeah, you can't argue back with your teachers, even if they're bullying you. You can't say anything back to your boss. If you've got patients, customers being rude to you, you're just supposed to
Take
suck
it.
it up and
Hmm.
accept it. So yeah, everything along that journey as we're growing up is telling us that we've got to accept that behavior. And we don't get, I think it's a really fundamental thing that's missing from schools, is that teaching people boundaries. And even like, when you get teased as a kid, we're either too fat, too thin, too spotty, our hair's too curly, or it's too straight, or it's too ginger,
Hmm.
all the things that kids do that people just normalize, and they're like, that's just kids being kids.
Or they also normalize, if a boy's roughing you up or
Oh yeah,
picking on you,
they
they
they're
fancy
only,
you, that's okay. And, even uh, e- I mean, it's happened for decades, right?
yeah,
Decades,
oh
probably
yeah, the guy
centuries.
hitting you is flirting.
Yeah. And although we recognize now that there's are abusive signs, abusive actions, we still don't teach our children, our girls, actively to recognize the behavior for what it is and how to protect themselves from that behavior. It's not something that's commonly talked about. I mean, because we're
No, it
still
needs to,
using that that mindset and teaching it to our children.
and it needs to be on the, like the school curriculum. And I was, during lockdown in the pandemic, the law changed to say that we had to teach teenagers, like 16 to 17-year-olds, about domestic abuse. But the statistics show that most people have had their first love relationship by the time they're 13, and some even like between 11 and 13.
Mhm.
So if girls are having their first relationships way before then, by the time they're 16, they might have had two or three different boyfriends who have all been abusive, controlling. So by the time they're 16, they just, that's normal, that's the normal to them, they don't ever question it. That's a pattern. So yes, okay, it's great the government have said we need to teach children, but we need to teach children like when they're 5 when they start school, and not just about about if the boy sat next to you is hitting you, or the girl sat opposite you is saying that you're fat. Is about us being able to teach children to say, no, that made me upset, you can't speak to me like that, or you can't do that.
Yeah, I think if we can start a conversation around boundaries and the communication of said boundaries as early as 5 or even before, I think it would change a lot of things. I think it's important for us to learn how to speak up for ourselves, how to advocate for ourselves. That no is a complete sentence. These things are learned for a lot of people a lot later. And I think a lot of things could be avoided if we understood these signs. Like, I mean, even coercive control until recently, it wasn't a thing, was it? Right? So it's like all of these things we need to be able to communicate openly. We need to be having these discussions so people are more aware, but not only aware for themselves, but aware for the generations to come. At some point, we have to change the narrative so that people can have a better quality of life and not get sucked into these relationships simply because they're looking for validation. And like we often talk about like self-love and how important it is for you to love yourself before you get into relationships. What nobody's told how to love themselves. We don't have this deep enough conversation at 5 and 6 when you should say, "Oh, I love myself." We don't reach them young enough, and then it becomes like a buzzword later on because we're not teaching, we're not giving the tools, and it's essentially we're failing the younger generation as a result. And because we know better, you know what I mean? And I mean,
Yeah, because we
you and I obviously have spent time learning about our traumas, spent time learning about our healing, but I just feel like collectively, these are why these conversations are important because there may be 30 and 40-year-olds that don't even know the red signs of abuse, and this is why these raw conversations are needed.
or that they've experienced it again and again, and it's just normal to them. So
Hmm.
again, I had one partner who was violent, who was all of the kind of, again, I didn't know there was 7 different types of abuse within an abuser's cycle, for example. And but then you could meet someone new who maybe only has 1 or 2 of them, and because we've been in such a bad abusive relationship before, we're almost like, oh well, maybe this one,
This is
there's
better.
only 2, so
Yeah,
I'm kind of lucky because it's not the whole 7 again.
yeah,
And so even though we know better, we still, there's a part of our brain that's rationalizing it, going, well, at least this one doesn't hit me, or,
exactly.
and that's, yeah, it's a pattern that needs to, it's something that needs to be disrupted, like we said, like generational at a young age,
Hmm.
because maybe some of the things I put up with, my nan would have said in her generation, that's normal, that's just how we're treated. And then maybe even my mum and dad. But like for us, we know it's not normal. We know it's not okay.
Hmm.
But we can't change a load of 40 and 50-year-old men's behavior. But we can start to speak to children. I think, we don't have to say to children about domestic abuse, but people also underestimate how many children see their parents an abusive parent, and
Hmm.
people are like, oh, it's okay, they're kids, they don't know. And
No,
I'd
there's a.
argue I'd argue that kids know everything, even from a
Mhm.
very young age. So if one of the parents is controlling, the kids will learn to modify their behavior around the person that's volatile, for example, or where they have to walk on eggshells. And so as I've taught teenagers, like again, it's very easy in retrospect with my experience to see where people maybe are living the way that I did, living in fear, or it's that constant eggshells, isn't it, of not knowing what you're going home to,
Mm-hmm.
how you're going to be treated that day. And then on the odd days where you're treated kindly, it's almost like then your mind starts tricking you into making excuses for the other days, because it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
it's not all bad.
No, not at
And I
all.
think that's something like you asked me earlier, you're like, why it takes us so long to leave. And it's also hard, isn't it, to rationalize for anyone that the person, like you called yours your Prince Charming, and I used to joke that my Prince Charming was a psychopath, is that actually it's very hard to rationalize that the person we're in love with, who is the love of our life, is actually the person that's destroying us.
Mm-hmm.
And that even though they're telling us they love us, that actually they can't possibly love us in a healthy way. And
It's and
maybe even some of them believe that they do love us. Maybe they do
mhm.
actually believe it. It's
I
not black and white at all, is it? It's not
Not at
simple.
all. And oftentimes, I mean, that's a very hard realization. But especially like when you spent years with somebody, like you get to a point where you recognize, ugh, this wasn't love. This like all of this really wasn't love. It's hard to move beyond that, but it's possible to move beyond that. Rachel, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I
I
mean,
know we can both talk for hours on this, can't
I
we?
know. I was like off camera. We've talked and
Yeah.
talked and talked, right? So, which is a great thing. But why don't you share with us how we can connect with you online?
So mostly I'm on LinkedIn, just on Rachael Lemon. So you can't miss me, red hair, lemon graphics. I'll send you a link. You can put it in under the podcast. Like I've just started on Substack, so I do write about my experiences, because like you said, the more we can talk about it and take the stigma away. And
Mhm.
that's something that I really hate, the way, we're treated. And it's not just by the perpetrator, it's everyone around us after. It's like, so you're
Yes.
damaged, broken, abused, you're stupid. So sometimes for me, that's more harmful than the actual person that was the perpetrator, because that was one person.
Hmm.
Whereas when like members of my family are like, oh, just get over it, you're gone now. And like they have no comprehension. And in one big part of me is really pleased that they don't understand it, because it means they've never been through it.
But
But
in
on
the
the
other
other
hand,
hand, I think that, like ignorance isn't bliss when it comes to things like this.
exactly. And I've actually written articles about, I think, the victim shaming element, whether it's intentional or not, it's abusive as well. And
Yeah.
it silences those who have survived, which is then again even more dangerous because they can end up back in toxic situations. Okay, so we'll definitely get your Substack and your LinkedIn information in the show notes. But before we wrap up, Rachel, give us just one key takeaway for the listeners.
I would say, if you think you're being abused, then you are. If there's any part of you that's like, this isn't right, like listen to that voice and
Mhm.
don't talk yourself out of it, because I think that's something that we do, isn't it? So it's like, and it's obviously reach out to someone, and understand that reaching out to someone and getting help doesn't mean you've got to leave or anything like that. There's a big pressure, and actually sometimes we're not ready, and those things take time. So it's around just finding someone safe that you can talk to, that's non-judgmental and isn't gonna, nobody should be telling anybody what to do, because that's something we can only figure out for ourselves.
Absolutely.
It's having someone to support you when you decide. That's when you
Mhm.
need the support, isn't it? Like, I've decided I'm going to try and leave. That's when you need somebody to help you with that stage. So yeah, if somebody's trying to tell you that you've got to leave, or just do this or just do that, like you said, it's almost like they're then controlling you
Mhm.
as well, and that's not healthy either, because it's a lot of stuff that we have to work through and heal and figure out. So it's not something that's done overnight, is it? It's not a one stop healing journey either, is it? For years things will crop up, and we'll have to go back and do a bit more healing. And so again, it's never a promise that, like, oh, you're just, that's why, the whole broken dialect is nonsense, because we're not like, people use the Chinese not the Chinese, the Japanese vase thing, don't they, with the gold and the broken cracks as an analogy? But like, we're not broken. We can't just be glued back together with some gold and everything's going to be fine for the rest of our lives, like you
No,
said.
it takes work. It takes a
Yeah,
lot
and
of work.
it's constant work. There'll always
Yeah.
be things that we see differently because of what we've been through. I think as well, like for me, I always argue that it's a post-traumatic response and not a disorder, because we're not disordered, we're not damaged, we're not mentally ill. I'd argue for anyone to go through traumatic experiences repeatedly
Hmm.
and not come out and be affected by it mentally. but that
Absolutely.
but that doesn't mean we've got a chemical imbalance in our brain or that we're mentally ill. So
No, it's
yeah,
definitely a learned response to our experiences.
yeah. So I think it's just, it is like that nagging doubt, that question that you get the first time. It was like, listen, the first time, I think. But
Yeah,
it's easy for us to say in retrospect, isn't it? Because again, like we said, once you've been love bombed and you're there, it's
it's
hard.
hard to recognize it, but again, like you said, if there is any niggling feeling, it's probably something that you need to take a second look at. And trust your gut, trust yourself. That will end up being your savior if
Yeah,
you
and
can
keep
trust yourself.
and again, like those like early signs, like isolating you from your friends and stuff. If somebody's trying to do that, then that's a really big trigger, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
it's when you do have relationships, it's kind of make sure you don't lose yourself and the things that you loved doing before. But that's a big warning sign, isn't it? That
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on Survival Made Disrupted. Thank you, listeners, for catching another episode. And I just want to remind you, you were not built to break. You damn sure were not built to just survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I